Let's pray. Lord, I pray in Yeshua's name that today's portion, we are able to glean an application for us today for the purpose of these instructions and these readings, that we can you share with us the things that you want us to know as an individual, as individuals, and as a ecclesia, as a congregation, and to share. In Yeshua's name we pray. Amen. All right. Today's portion starts in chapter 30 of Numbers. Moses spoke to the heads of the tribes concerning the children of Israel, saying, "This is the thing which the Lord has commanded. If a man makes a vow to the Lord or swears an oath to bind himself by some agreement, he shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth. Or if a woman makes a vow to the Lord and binds herself by some agreement while in her father's house in her youth, and her father hears her vow and the agreement by which she has bound herself, and her father holds his peace, then all her vow shall stand, and every agreement with which she has bound herself shall stand. But if her father overrules her on the day that he hears, then none of the vows nor her agreement by which she has bound herself shall stand, and the Lord will forgive her, for her fathers overruled her. If indeed she takes a husband while bound by her vows, or by a rash utterance from her lips by which she bounds herself, and her husband hears it and makes no response to her on the day that he hears, then her vows shall stand, and her agreement by which she binds herself shall stand. But if her husband overrules her on the day that he hears it, he shall make void her vow which she took and which she took and what she uttered with her lips, by which she bound herself, and the Lord will forgive her. Also, any vow of a widow or a divorced woman by which she has bound herself shall stand against her. If she vowed in her husband's house or bound herself by an agreement with an oath, and her husband heard it and made no response to her and did not overrule her, then all her vows shall stand, and every agreement by which she bound herself shall stand. But if her husband truly made them void on the day that he heard them, then whatever proceeded from her lips concerning her vows or concerning the agreement binding her, it shall not stand. Her husband has made them void, and the Lord will forgive her. Every vow and every binding oath to afflict her soul, her husband may confirm it, or her husband may make it void. Now, if her husband makes no response whatsoever to her from day to day, then he confirms all her vows or the agreement that bound her. He confirms them because he made no response to her on the day that he heard them. But if he does make them void after he has heard them, then he shall bear her guilt. These are the statutes which the Lord commanded Moses between a man and his wife, between a father and his daughter, and her youth in her father's house. I have read the Torah. That is from the mouth of God. Now, what does that mean? How does it apply? How should we entertain that in the way we walk today, in the way that we conduct ourselves today? Unlike any other creature in God's creation, none are quite like us. We are made in His image. We are made in the image of God. And everything he created it by speaking. If God makes a vow or he speaks something, it becomes a vow. If God speaks it, it becomes into existence. The universe conforms to what he says, and it is. Have you ever stopped to think about every word that proceeds out of your mouth? When you speak it, you have created it. When you speak it, you have brought it into existence, whatever that is. You know, we live in a time where we have social media, we have a lot of technology, and there's a lot of people speaking. And a lot of people speaking things and creating things that they don't understand that they're going to be held accountable for every utterance that come out of their mouth. Every curse, every broken vow that they speak, everything that comes out of their mouth comes out of our mouth. A lot of people speaking without thinking. You know, maybe there's something that we should glean from that. God says, if you speak a vow to me, if you say, and let's understand in the context of this, okay? This is, you know, what's the nadir? Whatever is, let's just put it this way. If the Torah allows it, and you make a vow to keep a certain portion of that Torah, you're expected to keep that Torah. The Nazarene vow. Wine is an acceptable thing. You have a certain aspects of life that the Torah makes provision for that is acceptable. But if you make a vow that you're going to deny yourself that, then you're responsible for that. God's going to hold you accountable if you make a vow to that.
What is an acceptable vow, or is it a type of process that that you've just thought in your mind, or is it something that you actually physically go do and say, vow?
Well, I don't know of any instructions except for the Nazarene where there's a certain process by which you shave your head, and it's an actual ceremony that you perform to commence this vow. But just to err on the side of caution, if you speak it, I think, what you think and what you speak, I think there's a distinction between that. But if you speak it, it creates the vow. Creation, like we said, God could think, let there be light, but until he says, let there be light, I don't think the Torah establishes that there's light till he speaks it. And we are like that in that we can speak blessings, we can speak curses from our mouth. And if we speak it, you can think, I'm going to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me. But it's not publicly proclaimed and held responsible to the point of perjury if I don't, until I raise my hand publicly and speak it open. Make sense?
I guess it falls under grace, but if we see we're having trouble not being able to keep that vow, we can always get help, spiritual help.
Well, you know, that's kind of the point of this whole thing, I think. Because let's put this in perspective. This is Israel has come from Egypt, been through the whole wilderness experience, Korah, all the things that have happened. They're actually sitting right now at the banks of the Jordan and are getting ready to cross over into the Promised Land. And Moses and these God has commanded this. So there's because Moses is coming to the end of his ministry. Joshua is about to take over. Aaron is his priesthood is about to come to an end. A whole new set of things are about to happen. And he's expressing and setting an example. And I don't think that this is one of those portions, this part right here, I think. This is Wayne, I'm thinking. You're reading the Torah and everything's going along, and all of a sudden, boom, you stop, and then there's this subject and this topic, and you're like, what? And it finishes and it carries back on again. It's like the curse of the bitter waters. You know, the Torah's going, and all of a sudden, if the spirit of jealousy comes over a man, and it goes through this process of taking her to the temple and the priest and the dust of the bitter water and all that stuff, and then it goes on. Well, you read that and you think, what? And then as you realize later on, paraphrasing everything in between, you get to the cross and Yeshua says, I thirst. And he took the bitter water. He took the curse. It ultimately came down to what he did about it. And I think this is very similar in that aspect too. What God, I think, is saying is that when he speaks something and he makes a vow, he does not break it. He's not going to break it. He's the same yesterday to tomorrow, today and tomorrow. I said I will deliver you. He's going to deliver us. If he said I will bring you to myself, he will bring us to himself. When God makes a vow, there is no ifs, ands, or buts. And he's saying, he wants us to know that when we go over to the other side, he's saying, if you make a vow, I'm going to hold you to the same standard that I hold myself to. And, you know, it's when he put on flesh and he came down here later in this part where he walked among us, you know, it's better not to swear or make oaths. But if you do, you're going to be held responsible for it. Every word that came out of your mouth in regard to that, he's going to hold you to that. But just let your yes be yes and your no be no.
So I wanted to ask a question. I have a couple of things, actually. Number one, so when it comes to making vows or oaths, even if it be to ourselves, like if we made a vow to ourselves or a promise to ourselves that we're not going to do this anymore, or that we will do this, or whatever, is this different from like taking your thoughts captive and how you can commit adultery without anything ever coming out of your mouth? Is this different, or is this still applies if you think something and you honestly mean it in your mind you honestly mean it, but you haven't spoke about it to anyone, does that still apply as if you've made a vow or an oath to yourself?
Yeah, let's just cut to the chase on that. What Buddy said earlier, the distinction between what we think and what we say, and then what we invoke with what we say. I don't think God is saying, if you're saying something about you, he's not going to hold you to that, because he knows you're made of flesh. This is about a vow to him. This is about you saying, God, if you do this, I will do that. And everything that you say that you will do, if he does that, he's saying, you better be ready to write that check, because I'm going to cash it. Does that help you? So, if you're in a situation where you go, God, if you get me out of this, I will change my life. I will do this, I will do that. I think that is more in line to what we're saying than if you say to yourself something like, you know, I promise, without invoking God's name, if I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that, and then you don't do it, the enemy still, if you speak it out loud and the enemy hears that, he's still going to use that against you. He's still going to attack you. So you remember what you said to you know what you promised. That kind of thing still exists. This isn't about that.
That kind of goes with what I'm seeing here, because of the volume of the scroll was written of him, okay, and it's also this is a direct correlation to the fate of Israel, who has taken the vow upon themselves. All that you say, we will do, okay? In the hearing of God, and he has not, and God not disannul them. He didn't disannul them. And Israel continued, you know, in not adhering to that vow. And so they didn't hold up their end, but God held it up for them. Yes, it was by Abraham and walking through the pieces, the whole thing. So yes, I agree. It's all about him in these vows.
Yes. So, this is a double portion, so I don't want to get too bogged down in this very first chapter. But ultimately, that is, I think, the point of it. What I wanted to get across today, what I felt is what he wanted us to get to understand today. Is that we need to understand that all of this, there's nothing here that we don't know. We understand about taking our thoughts captive. We understand about the blessings and the curses. We understand about Shema, to love God with all our heart and all our soul and all our mind, and to love one another like that. But sometimes I think we have not really appreciated the whole concept of our mouths, the things that we say. the blessings that we speak, the curses that we speak, and the consequences and the ramifications. You could say and do 40 wonderful things, but you say one contrary thing to somebody, and that's all they remember. That's the first thing that comes into their mind. That's how powerful it is. Every person is going to be held responsible for every utterance that comes out of our mouth. Every time you say the Lord's name in vain, that word, that pronunciation that spoke this, when we hit our finger with a hammer, or we get mad at something, and we get that right there, every one of them has a consequence. Every time we see somebody and the first thing that we say is a contrary curse or anything other than a blessing on them, we're responsible for that. Fathers, we need to think about what we say to our wives and to our children. Because all the blessings don't mean anything if all our kids remember is, Daddy said he doesn't love me. Or if Daddy said something like, I wish you were never here. You're no son of mine. You can't take it back. And if we would just think about what we say just a little longer before we actually say it, whether it's a vow, a curse, or even a blessing. Because you might bless something that God has already cursed.
Be careful what you ask for.
What's that?
Be careful what you ask for.
Well, that too. Go ahead, Mary.
Anyway, I was earlier when you were talking about what you say, and you said, for instance, God, if you do this, then I will. Well, those two words right there, I will. I mean, we talk about God's will for us, and our will is to do what God wants us to do. So I think that's a really strong word when we say, I will do this. You're willing it. That's all I had.
Well, when you're a kid and you're becoming aware, you get to that age where you start becoming aware and you start learning the concepts of things like, you promise? You promise you will? And then what it was promised doesn't happen. And they get an excuse. If you say you will, you're absolutely right. If you tell a child, I will be there Thursday, you can't undo the damage if you're not there on Thursday. Because they start learning that excuses come into it. And they start learning things like, my fingers were crossed. These little tricks that we come up with. where we say what we want to say, but yet we don't really have the intention of doing it. We never had the intention of doing it. We just said it to get out of whatever it was, whether it's like an uncomfortable meeting or something that we just want to flip off. We just, okay, I'll be there Thursday. Or I need somebody to help me. Can you help me move? Yeah, I'll help you move. I'll be there on Sunday. Now, I just thought about what I just said. Austin, don't take that personal because I know you were sick. I wasn't talking to you. I was like, okay, that's not what I'm thinking right there. But the point of it is that let your yes be yes and your no be no. If you say you're going to be there, then you need to do what you said you're going to do.
So there's something that my father once told me. He's told me a lot of really interesting things that make you look at things differently. And one of them was, a person is only as good as their word.
Yeah.
Whatever they say to you, if they cannot keep that, then they have very little worth, is what he told me. And I hold that true. I hold that true. If somebody says that they're going to do something, then they'd better do it. Otherwise, what they say becomes invalid to me. And this is talking about us having this type of word with God. He's given us his word, and everything that he has given to us is because he said it is. When we say, okay, God, this is what I'm going to do, regardless of what we're asking for or anything, if we're giving our vow to God, if we're giving our word to God that we are going to do this, then we are going to be held accountable for that. And we better stand up to what it is that we're saying.
Well, if I take what you're saying and I think to myself, well, you do this because you love somebody, then my next process is Shema Israel. Love God with all your heart and all your soul and your mind. If I say I'm going to do this, God, I'm going to do it because I know you want that. And to love your one another like that. So if I say it to you, I'm going to do the same thing and hold it to that same standard. That creates community, it creates love, it creates confidence, it creates community, a sense of well-being, and you have what's the word I'm looking for? Safeness, trust, purpose, and everything else destroys that. That's why people are stressed today. That's why people are hurt today. That's why people don't trust anything. Correct? Because government says one thing, they do another. The media says one thing, they do another. Your neighbor says one thing, he does another. Your children say one thing, they do another. You say one thing, you did another. And when it's all said and done, when it gets down to a certain point, you think to yourself, I literally can't trust anybody but him. And even then, I submit that if you're not careful and you're not grounded and you don't have discernment, you're going to start doubting him too. Well, maybe he doesn't really care about me. Maybe he doesn't really know who I am. Because that's all that you see, that's all that you hear, that's all that you can perceive. Perception, reality comes back around again. While I'm thinking about that, perception and reality. What's the antidote to perception and reality? Faith. Of unfaith, the belief in things that you can't see. That's why that's important. Shema, all the Torah no greater commandments than these, to love God with all your heart and all your soul and all your might, with all your strength, to love one another like that. I mean, if we could do that, literally, figuratively, and intentionally, imagine the sense of community that we would have with that. All right. So, regardless of who makes the vow, where you're at, who you are, what sex you are, married, unmarried, ultimately the point of the whole thing is maybe you should think about what you're saying before you say it. And if you actually, upon contemplation, speak it out, just know you're responsible for it. Dean.
Wayne, I just wanted to go a step further with that. In James chapter 4, it says, "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city, to spend a year there, buy and sell, and make a profit, whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow. For what is your life? It is even a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we shall live and do this or that. But now you boast in your arrogance, and all such boasting is evil." So, we can say to somebody, we'll be there next week, but we don't know for sure what's going to happen between now and next week. So we should focus more on saying if God wills, or I try to say, God willing, I'll be there. If I remember to say that, I don't always say that, but God willing, I'll see you tomorrow. Because we don't know what can happen.
Well,
God knows, but we don't. So.
Well, that's absolutely true, and you're right. But I would add one more element to that, is based on intention. Even if you say God willing and your intention is you're not going to do it, it doesn't matter. It always comes down to your if you intend to do that when you speak it, and you get hit by a truck the next day, obviously you're not going to be there. But see, this is what you do to me all the time, Dean. There's a difference between, or a distinction between your intention and what happens in the world. As long as you have good intentions, all the law, even man's law, is based on the concept of what a reasonable and prudent man would do, or the intent of the law is. And so that's the standard by which elements of crimes and elements of the law stands. To enter or remain in a building, structure, or conveyance with the intent to commit a crime therein. So what you're saying is absolutely true, and I agree with you 100%. But I think the what's the word? The preference, or the more important issue is that that thought process at the beginning, when we have this, I will be there. When you think, before you even speak, you analyze everything, that's all these things that we're talking about right now. And you go, I don't know if I can be there, but I'm going to try, as compared to, I'm going to be there, God willing, that I'm alive, capable, because all that goes without saying if it's a good thing. If you are in Torah, and it's an acceptable thing, and it's a good thing, and for the right reasons, there's no reason why you wouldn't be there. Is that, yeah. Well, yes, exactly. So you to me, my birthday, you say you'll show up and you don't because a business thing came up or a family emergency came up. I know you love me and you would come if you could, that's fine. But if you're talking to a child and you say, I'm going to be there, I think the significance of not being there in that situation creates, that process should be thought out a whole lot more, because that changes the perception of, we call it innocence. That's one of the great things about children, is they got this sense of innocence where everything is happy and wonderful and people do what they say and it's a great world and everybody loves me. And then when they lose that innocence because somebody hurt them spiritually, physically, or emotionally, or somebody broke a promise, that's usually the first one that kids get hurt with. Somebody broke a promise. And that's when they start, the first chink in their innocent armor starts happening. And I think as human beings, from the garden to today, is the same process. Our armor has been beat up so bad that without him, we have no sense of right at all anymore. Anyway.
I think it goes a much deeper step than that. We train our children by what we do more than by what we say. And if I keep my word, they learn that.
Yeah.
But if I don't keep my word, I am conditioning and training them to lie. I am training and conditioning them to disrespect and doubt my Heavenly Father, who I am supposed to mirror to my family.
Well, see, y'all know about the different levels of understanding, Pashat, Sod, Remes, these different concepts of understanding of Scripture. The Scripture says, thou shalt not steal. Says what it says, Pashat, basic level, don't steal. But it could also go down to like in a very deep level, Sod, like way underground, the Hebrew word Sod, it's like a deep understanding of thou shalt not steal from the Lord by the things we say or do. And y'all are covering, this is exactly what's happening here. We are going in and out of Pashat to Remes, to the group level, to the Sod level on this concept. We're all over that. And it's good that we do that and have that understanding. And I'm glad to see that that's happening. But today, I feel that it's like just if all we get out of this today is that to think about what I say before I say it. And is it beneficial? Is it good? Is it a blessing? Is it Torah? Is it right? And think about as much of it as we can, and think about what we say before we say it. We live in a world where there's somebody says something and a response, call, response, and we get in debates and arguments, and we say things in the heat of the moment, and we don't even take the time to consider that everything we just said we're going to be held accountable for. It's like when you're angry. I'm learning. It's taken me 60 years, and I still don't have it perfected, but when I get angry, I need to shut up. Because I am more than likely to say something incredibly silly, stupid, mean, hurtful when I'm angry. I'm going to be honest with you. I have never afterwards looked back on a situation and thought to myself, when I was angry and very upset, thought to myself, you know what? That was one of the best decisions I've ever made when I said that. It's never happened. So, anyway, vows. They're important. Not only in that when we make them to God, it's especially that if we speak it, just to understand and know that I am expected to follow through with every word I said. And then that's to Him. And everything is based on Shema in what relates to Him and what relates to each other. So if I make a vow to y'all, because I love Him, I need to hold that vow to you just as strong as I do to the vow to Him. And if I speak to you, I should speak to you as if I'm speaking to Him. And it's a process. We're all doing it. We're walking our halakha to that purpose. But ultimately, it comes down to that. And that's chapter 30. We're going to move to 31 now, which is about going to war against the Midianites. And the Lord spoke to chapter 31, verse 1. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, take vengeance on the Midianites for the children of Israel. Afterwards, you shall be gathered to your people. So when you take care of this little bit of business, I'm going to gather you, and you're going to go into the promised land. So Moses spoke to the people, saying, arm some of yourselves for war, and let them go against the Midianites to take vengeance for the Lord in Midian. 1,000 from each tribe of all the tribes of Israel you shall send to the war. So there will be recruited from the divisions of Israel 1,000 from each tribe, 12,000 armed for war. And Moses sent them to the war, 1,000 from each tribe, and he sent them to war with Phinehas and the son of Eleazar the priest, with the holy articles and the signal trumpets in his hand. And they went to war. And they destroyed the Midianites. They killed the king of Midian. With the rest of those who were killed were Eva, Recham, Zur, Hur, and Reba, the 5 kings of Midian. Balaam, remember Balaam? Sorry. Balaam that Balak hired, that revelation earlier today, that spirit of Balak where you taught them how to destroy Israel. He was killed by the sword. And they took the spoils of war, and they burned with fire all the cities that were dwelt in all the forts. And they took all the spoils and the booty of men and beasts. And they brought them captives, the booty and the spoils, to Moses and Eleazar the priest, who was with them, to the congregation of the children of Israel, in verse 12. To the plains of Moab by the Jordan across from Jericho. And Moses and Eleazar the priest and all the leaders of the congregation went to meet them outside the camp. But Moses was angry with the officers of the army, with the captains over the thousands who had come from the battle. And Moses said to them, have you kept all the women alive? Look, verse 16, look, these women caused the children of Israel through their counsel of Balaam to trespass against the Lord in the incident of Peor. And there was a plague among the congregation. Do you remember that? Aaron had to run out with a censer to get between the death and the life. And Moses is saying, and you've brought this back? Which brings up a point. Kind of alluded to it earlier. And this is something, to apply it to ourselves today. Have you ever been at war with something and you got victory and deliverance over it, only to bring it right back home, set up as a trophy over there? And then you have that look on your face 6 months later when you're right back where you started and you've got pollution in your house and your life spiritually again, and you're looking like, we need to remember that. We need to see this for the truth that it is. I don't know, I'm trying to find a so-called politically correct way to say this. We're not in the land, so all the remedies of how to prevent these kind of things we can't do because we're not in the land. And Caesar looks badly upon killing every one of them. And in this example, God told Moses to tell the children of Israel to make an army and to arm them and to go kill every single one of them, including the young and all of the women that participated in that incident at Pure. Which theoretically should eliminate the problem, unless you bring it home with you. Unless you don't do it exactly the way you were told to do it by the Torah or by God. We can't get victory in this life and then go back into the world and get the spoils of the world and bring it home and expect it not to pollute us again. You pray for a job, you get the job, you finally got some money, and then you go back out to the world and you get cable and you bring that into your house and you put it on all those channels that have all that nasty stuff on it so you could sit there and watch it in the joyfulness of your house. Brought it back into your house. You get a victory over alcohol. And you go out in there and you get another bottle and you bring it home. What changed? You get victory over your finances. And you can start growing money and save it for not only your family, but God's kingdom. And you go out there and you buy whatever. And whatever. And you bring it into your house. And it becomes an idol. Look at what I got. Well, that's a really nice truck. I know it's mine. And I'm out there waxing it and washing it. Daddy, Daddy, can you come play with me? No, I'm washing my truck. I'm taking care of my truck. My PlayStation. I got a video game. Got a new video game. I'm playing my new video game. If you're married and you got a wife and you got kids, you probably should be more aware about your wife and your kids. I'm not saying you can't have fun and have things, but it probably shouldn't be the thing. You shouldn't say, let me finish this battle on this video game and then I'll come. Probably shouldn't. Got to have priorities. Should be careful about what you bring into your house. And then they actually, after everything was settled and everything was made right, and they had done what they should have done in the first place, they went through the process of being purified, being outside the camp, being washed, cleaning their blood, and then everything that was plundered had to be purified. If it could sustain being purified by fire, it had to be put to the fire. All the gold and all the silver, they melted down the idols and all the things and purified it by fire. All the things that couldn't withstand the fire had to go through water, be washed and clean, and all that kind of stuff. Everything's been washed by water once already. The next time he comes, everything's going to be purified by fire. I have to remind myself sometimes that if it can't withstand the fire, it's not going to last. If I don't finish this race the right way and be transformed in a twinkling of an eye from corruptible to incorruptible, I'm not going to survive the fire that's coming. And nothing that's not transformed in the twinkling of an eye is going to survive. That Fender Stratocaster I have is not going to survive the second coming of God. My truck isn't going to survive my PlayStation will not survive the second coming of God. Why am I so distracted by that now? I should be concentrating on the things that will survive. Those in the back. Those over there. Everybody sitting in here. I'm one of those people that when I talk about Torah and teach and share, I always like to find this is what happened to them then, this is what they did, this is what happened to them, this is the lessons to learn. But I always like to find a way to extrapolate it to us today. That the Torah is still viable, that it's still true and alive and has reason and purpose and things that we can learn and glean today to help us with our walk today. Because you know what? I wasn't there then. I wasn't in the wilderness, literally. I wasn't literally in Egypt. I wasn't in the garden. Apparently, God chose to make me for a time such as this, today. And He's the same yesterday, tomorrow, and today, and tomorrow. So, if I can't see His Torah to me today, I got an issue. Make sense? Okay. I'm not going to read it all. But the amount of spoil that they took and how they split it up, I suggest that sometime when you get a chance, just to go over it and to try to grasp the amount of sheep and animals and gold that was obtained through the plunder of this situation. How much that it was. And the total amount of revenge that was taken on Midian, that they were literally removed. And then consider that in verse 49, they said to Moses, "Your servants have taken account of the men of war who are under our command, and not a man is missing." 12,000 men went off to war, did all of that, and 12,000 came back. If you need an example that God is with you when you go to do something, remember that. If God truly is sending you out to go do something, and he sends 2 of you and 2 of you come back, God sends out 12,000 and 12,000 come back, God. If 37 of you decide you're going to do it on your own and 37 of you go out and only 4 of you come back, probably not God. And Israel has a tendency to do that sometimes too. And then in 32, goes an amazing thing. They're all getting ready to cross over to the Jordan. And there was a few of the tribes, Gad and Reuben and some of Manasseh, that decided they wanted to stay on this side because of all the spoils that they got. They got all this cattle and sheep, and they liked the pasture that they were looking at on this side. And so they wanted to stay on this side. Now, ultimately, if you read it, they agreed to help Israel to go conquer the land and to fight for them, and they would do that, but they would consider this their inheritance and come back to it. But to me, that brings up a question. How do you get so satisfied with what you can see, knowing that God has something over there that he's trying to take you to, and you say, I'm happy right here? I'm going to leave it right there. I'm going to leave that right there. Don't be so quick to think, oh, this is so, I'm happy right here. If God's in the equation and he says, I'm taking you there, I think I want to go there. I'm going to wait till we're there, no matter how good it looks over here. And then 33, they start going through all the camps that they took during the 40 years. They moved a total of 42 times. And then when you consider that the whole journey, if they had just literally went from where they started to where they wanted to go, 11 days. I keep doing that, I'm sorry. 11 days, 40 years. Yeah. I don't know anything about that. I went straight from being a child straight to a perfect Torah keeper. Knowing the truth from a lie, the clean from the unclean. You know, the reality of it is, if we hadn't gone through what we had gone through, I'm constantly remind myself, I wouldn't have you. And I wouldn't have my grandbabies. And I wouldn't have the son-in-laws that I have. And in case you don't know, I was being facetious. That was not, I'm not a perfect Torah keeper. And I didn't get it right from the time I came from the age of accountability, when I turned 13 and went, oh yeah, I got it all figured out, never made a mistake. I've made a lot of mistakes. Chapter 34, God explains and sets up the parameters of where all the boundaries for the tribes would be. If I was a lawyer and I was in court trying to represent a client on what was his, I think having a piece of paper that says, God said God gave this to you. Well, case closed. But the children go in, sets up sanctuary cities. We've covered those in past teachings and cycles. The avenger of blood. The very last verse, 34, in chapter 35. Therefore, do not defile the land which you inhabit, in the midst of which I dwell, for I am the Lord, dwell among the children of Israel. Once again, to grab the totality of that concept, that if we were physically in the land, and in the midst of the land, in the middle of the land, God existed and would come down there. The pillar of fire, the pillar of smoke would literally be in the land with us. How we conduct business and do what we do, would we be different than we are now? And if so, then by faith and by our belief that he is that who he says he is, and he will do what he says he will do, and he will keep his vows, then why don't we act accordingly to that now? How come we don't live like God is in the midst of us now? And act and conduct our business and our interactions with each other as if God's literally sitting right there. This Sabbath, there'll come a time when we will be with him on Sabbath. He will be up here. And the Father same expectation, the same reverence, the same awe. Why don't we have that right now? Buddy.
So, something that my husband and I have discussed several times, a lot of things in Torah separate the difference between keeping those following those instructions in the land versus out of the land. Passover was one of those things that you didn't have to do outside of the land, yet we choose to do that because we're honoring God.
Mm-hmm.
So when they were in the wilderness, they didn't do Passover, but today, well, on Sinai, yes. But so I think when we're looking at these commandments and we're going, oh, well, we don't have to do that because that's in the land. But if it's something that is honoring God, why would you not want to do that even outside of the land? I'm not saying like with the blood getter and stuff like that that we should be having that. Obviously, that's not something that we would do, and that's not something that we would have here. But things like, just the way how you act, not letting the land that we have now, like our property that we own here in America, I wouldn't want something to come in and defile that, against God. So, I mean, just because it's not Israel, but we say that that land that we have is because God gave that to us anyway. Everything we have is because God has given it to us. So why would we want to allow for things to make them unholy, make them unclean by having those things with us?
I agree. And that's the kind of the point of the whole thing is that I'm trying to, and I'm speaking for myself, to just get to a point that I live my life as if he's right there every day, as he is, but physically in right here, that because I love him, I want to do as right as I can.
Right.
And that's really the halakha that each and every one of us have, our walk, what we're striving for. And so the last part gets into the inheritance, and ultimately he makes provisions that when they get there, even if a man dies and he doesn't have a son to carry on his name, that through the daughters and everything, and then the marriages, they stay within the same tribe, that the inheritance is always where it's supposed to be, that the land is within the groups and the tribes and the individuals and the families forever, always in place. Which, if you listen to the way people talk today, they say there's only one tribe. And so I don't know how they rectify, how you rectify the concept that God made a provision for all to always have a place, that it can literally be one place for one group now. That's another story. I'm going to stop right there. And so that concludes Bimbar, the chapter of Numbers, and the traditional saying, kazik, kazik, fanish, kazik. And that's our portion for today.